Before we begin Unit 17, here is the answer to the Unit 16 question. The best answer is choice B.
Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, is a widely used program that combines the use of biological, chemical, and cultivation methods in proper sequence and timing to keep pest populations in check. Since there can be serious environmental and health consequences associated with the misuse of chemical pesticides, much time and effort has and continues to be dedicated to the proper handling and use of these substances. Successful crops need soil that is rich in nutrients and capable of supporting plant structures. Maintaining soil quality is a major factor affecting food security. Although it requires much more energy and costs more to manufacture than organic fertilizer, there are no significant health effects associated with the use of inorganic fertilizer. Unit 17. How about a drink?
Few of us have ever given much thought to having enough fresh water. Why should we? All we have to do is turn on the tap and there it is.
The true scare is going to come when the first major city, such as Las Vegas, runs out of water. That's impossible, right?
Wrong. Although fresh water is a renewable resource, we are managing it poorly and overpopulation is placing too great a demand on existing supplies.
Common sense tells us if we don't start to change the way in which we use this precious resource, we will eventually find ourselves high and dry.
Water is essential to life. You've known ever since grade school that 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered with water. However, did you know that only a very small percentage of the Earth's water is fresh water, available for drinking and using for other purposes we deem necessary?
The majority of Earth's water is salt water, and most of the remaining fresh water is inaccessible, locked up in polar ice caps or located in deep underground reservoirs, leaving only a very small percentage readily available for use.
How we take advantage of that limited amount of fresh water is critical.
Humans don't just drink fresh water, they use it for many other purposes, such as irrigation for farming, manufacturing, recreation, and grounds maintenance.
As the human population increases, so does the demand for fresh water. Since the amount of water on our planet is constant, this is obviously a serious problem for our society to address.
People tend to underestimate the amount of water that is actually used, primarily because they don't consider what goes on behind the scenes. Let's examine the actual amount of water that it takes to produce some very common products.
It seems like it shouldn't take much water to make a t-shirt. However, a t-shirt is made out of cotton. Consider the amount of water that the plants need to consume during their lifespan in order to produce enough cotton required to make one t-shirt.
How about the amount of water needed to grow beans and process coffee? A single cup requires gallons of water.
Now consider how much water is needed to grow enough plants to support the livestock or crops that over 7.5 billion people rely on for sustenance.
The truth is that we leave quite a big footprint with regard to water resources, and shortages are already occurring in some regions of the world.
The two major freshwater sources are surface water and groundwater. Surface water is the result of either precipitation in the form of rain or melting of snow that migrates across the land in the form of rivers and streams.
This flow of water collects in depressions, creating lakes and estuaries, and eventually flows out into the oceans.
If rain does not evaporate or infiltrate into the ground, it is referred to as surface runoff. The area over which water can flow is called a watershed or drainage basin, an important concept to remember.
When we discuss how pollutants travel through the environment, you will realize that the movement of contaminants typically coincides with the direction of flowing water, and they often remain confined to distinct watersheds.
It should be noted that in mountainous regions, gradual snowmelt, counted on as a source of fresh water, is referred to as reliable runoff. If an area's climate changes, the amount of reliable runoff will also be affected.
Groundwater is exactly what it sounds like, water in the ground. Rainwater percolates down into the spaces between gravel and porous rock until it is met with an impenetrable layer. This area of stored water is referred to as an aquifer.
Groundwater has a zone of saturation where the spaces between the gravel and porous rock are completely filled. We call the highest point of this zone the water table.
Our ability to extract groundwater from aquifers is extremely valuable, as this water is useful for drinking and irrigation, can be found almost everywhere, is renewable if not extracted too quickly, and is relatively inexpensive to exploit.
There are, however, limitations associated with extracting groundwater. If it's removed too rapidly, rainwater infiltration may not be able to keep up, and the aquifer will become depleted. Sometimes the land above the depleted aquifers will sink down, a process known as subsidence.
Since the water is underground, any contamination that occurs may last a long time, as remediation efforts are hampered by inaccessibility.
Another concern with groundwater is that deep wells are sometimes non-renewable, so processes and systems that rely on them as a long-term resource are destined for future complications.
One of the biggest misconceptions with water is that it can be transferred easily from one area to another.
Due to climatic conditions, only specific species are supposed to live in certain biomes. People, however, have altered the environment to meet their own desires.
For example, there aren't supposed to be any green lawns in Phoenix, Arizona. The only reason they can exist in this desert biome is that people have brought in water that's not supposed to be there.
The transportation of water from one area to another creates two serious problems.
The first is that the original source of water becomes stressed, and the second is that an enormous amount of water is lost due to evaporation during the transportation process.
There's an amazing true story about what was once one of the world's largest freshwater lakes, the Aral Sea, that literally disappeared as water from the two rivers that fed the lake was diverted in order to irrigate an area that had a naturally dry climate.
The irresponsible management of this water resource serves as a tragic example of what happens when humans fail to live sustainably with nature.
Saltwater can be converted into freshwater, applying a process known as desalination.
Although this may sound like a great solution to our freshwater shortage problem, the cost associated with using this process on a large scale is very high.
Desalination negatively affects marine life and also results in the production of a salty waste product that is difficult to dispose of.
The only true solution to the water shortage problem is to employ methods of sustainable water use.
We need to waste less and not deplete our aquifers.
Farmers will need to employ innovative methods to irrigate their farms, and manufacturers will need to find ways to recycle water needed in their production processes.
Countries sharing surface water sources must work together to use these common resources wisely.
Economics will also need to play a role in sustainable water management. Substantial increases in water prices and subsidy programs for water conservation are already in place in some countries and may not be too far off in the United States.
Placing a significant price tag on water will make people think twice before wasting it. As you will learn in a later unit, efforts must also be made to preserve the quality of our water supplies, as increased demand and overuse tend to degrade water purity.
I think it's time for a drink.
Here is your question for Unit 17.
Which of the following statements is true?
Choice A. Most of the Earth's water is fresh water.
Choice B. We often underestimate the amount of fresh water that we use.
Choice C. Our only source of fresh water is surface water.
Or choice D. Sustainable water use is a good practice, but not the solution to our freshwater crisis.
The answer and explanation are provided at the beginning of Unit 18.